Behind me is the largest ocean in the world, the Pacific Ocean. But in this ocean, there's also something that shouldn't be there. And last I remember, it was about the size of Texas and growing. Let's talk about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch on this edition of Hippie versus Jock. Alright folks, I guess we'll talk about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. For the most part, I can't really say what's happening out there. I just know out of all the things I read what does and doesn't make sense. A while back, I ended up learning about BPA and stuff like that. And for the most part, I can never figure out how all the garbage really got out there. And then I came across this while walking around. Now, mind you, I'm a reader. When I walk by stuff, a lot of times, just out of pure curiosity, I'll read it. At some point in time, I'll read enough stuff to where I can put together some thought process on what does and doesn't make sense. Now, they talk about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, and it's the size of Texas. I've never been out there. I've seen some interesting documentaries, but I've also seen one documentary where they actually went out there and they never saw exactly what the pictures are out there, but they did come across things such as like tons of plastic, but it was little microscopic like pieces of plastic where it's literally kind of just built into the ocean now. If you looked at some of my other videos, you actually know that BPA is one of the things that causes estrogen or hormone disruptors, or what is it called? Endocrine disruptor hormones or something along those lines. And I can't really tell you that things don't make sense, or how come the oceans, which seem to be one of the biggest places where they actually dump stuff, how come they don't pay more attention to it? For the most part, you see all this stuff about climate change, and first it was global warming and the documentary Inconvenient Truth, and you know, I watched the documentary, and for the most part, you know, I didn't know whether or not to believe this stuff, but some of this stuff seems like it makes sense. But what doesn't make sense to me is how come they don't act on some of the things that they say. Number one, if they know these plastics such as BPA are a big issue, how come I can come across a sign over in the marina, out in Playa Del Rey, that says basically, don't throw your trash away until you get out at least 3 miles away from shore? You would think stuff like that didn't exist. And for the longest, I couldn't figure out exactly how the Great Pacific Garbage Patch even happened. But if we're allowed to use the ocean, which is probably one of the biggest contributors to why we as humans are even alive, I can't figure out exactly what we can and should care about. I'm out in California. We have this drought. Honestly, one of the easiest things to do, or one of the things that seems like it makes some sense to me, is figure out a way to conserve the water that actually does fall when it rains. For the most part out here in California, when it rains, the water goes directly in the drain and dumps directly out to the ocean. Back in the day, before we, I guess, built up California with all the houses and all the roads and stuff like that, when that water fell, it fell basically into the ground and got saved. Kind of like a little lifeline for when things happen. So, I don't know. I'll put more in the few links about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. You would think, with them talking about CO2 and global warming and stuff like that, they would pay a hell of a lot more attention to our oceans, because honestly, if you remember from school, plants breathe in CO2 and actually give out oxygen. Humans breathe out CO2 and breathe in oxygen. Some of the largest vegetation we actually have in the world, and some of the fastest growing things in the world as far as vegetation, are actually in the ocean. I'll actually find something. About 2 to 3 feet seaweed is capable of growing per day. So if you don't think that would spew out and suck in some CO2 and give us nice, clean, fresh oxygen, I'm not sure what to tell you. But that's all I wanted to say. Was actually really interesting walking past that, seeing that basically you're allowed to throw away garbage once you get 3 miles out. So things like the Great Pacific Garbage Patch can happen. And I know they also have a North Atlantic garbage patch of some sort, and I'm sure there are other things, but that's it. Just wanted to discuss it. If you guys are curious, you can go ahead and look up some of the stuff for yourself. As always, I'll put some links down below for stuff to get you started if you're interested. Thanks for watching.